It was a grand day on the planet of Zorath. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the lush green palace gardens. Inside the royal palace, the air was thick with excitement as the people of Zorath gathered for the annual celebration of their queen's reign. The queen had ruled over her people for decades, a strong and invincible leader. To the Zorathians, she was a living legend, and her strength was unmatched. The queen stood tall and regal in the center of the grand hall. Her long, silvery hair flowed down her back, shimmering in the light. Her eyes, bright with the wisdom of years, looked over the sea of her subjects with pride. Clad in her finest robes, she spoke of peace, prosperity, and the continued unity of her empire. The sound of applause echoed through the grand hall, and the people cheered for her as they always had. She was their protector, their goddess in the flesh. Among the gathered crowd, a single human stood out. Sergeant Jacob, a guard sent from Earth as part of an intergalactic peacekeeping mission, was stationed in the Queen's palace for security. Though he had spent many months on Zorath, he still felt like a stranger in this alien world. He wasn't used to the way the Zorathians looked at him. At best, he was a curiosity. At worst, a threat. But his duty was clear: protect the Queen and ensure the safety of her reign. Jacob had always admired the Queen from afar. There was something about her strength, her poise, and her ability to command respect that made her stand out among other rulers. She wasn't just a queen, she was a symbol of power, the embodiment of the Zorathian people's hopes and dreams. But as he watched her speak, something felt off. The Queen's speech began to waver. At first, it was subtle, a slight falter in her voice, an imperceptible shift in her posture. But then, just as the crowd erupted in applause, the unthinkable happened. The Queen staggered. Her hands gripped the edges of the podium, her legs buckled beneath her. For a moment, she stood there, trying to regain her balance, but it was clear she was losing control. Her eyes widened, pupils dilating as if in shock, and then, with a sudden gasp, she collapsed to the floor. A hush fell over the crowd. Gasps of disbelief echoed through the hall. The Queen, the mighty ruler of the Zorathian Empire, had fallen. No one moved at first, frozen in shock. Jacob's heart raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Queen was known for her strength, her invincibility. She had never shown signs of weakness before. This wasn't just a fainting spell. Something was seriously wrong. Jacob pushed through the stunned crowd, his instincts kicking in. He reached the Queen's side within moments, kneeling beside her. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale, almost ashen. She was still alive, but barely. Her heart pounded erratically in her chest, and her lips were tinged with a bluish hue. "Someone, get a medic!" shouted one of the Zorathian officers. But no one moved. They were too stunned, too afraid to act. It was up to Jacob. He quickly placed his hands on the Queen's chest, feeling for her heartbeat. The pulse was there, but it was weak, irregular. Something wasn't right. Jacob had seen enough medical emergencies back on Earth to know that this was no ordinary collapse. The Queen was not just fainting, she was in trouble. His heart pounded in his chest as he acted quickly. He leaned down, placing his ear close to her mouth. Her breathing was labored, her chest rising and falling in erratic bursts. Jacob had no time to wait for the Zorathian doctors. He wasn't sure if they could handle this. As a human, he was trained to react under pressure, to stabilize those in critical condition. But this was different. This was the Queen of an entire empire, and her life was hanging by a thread. "Hold on," Jacob whispered, more to himself than to her. He placed his hand on her chest again, feeling for a rhythm. Her heartbeat was growing weaker by the second. The crowd stood in stunned silence as Jacob did what he could. He began CPR, pressing down firmly on her chest, hoping to restart her heart. It was a risk, but there was no other choice. He glanced up to see the royal guards standing at the edges of the hall, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had never seen their queen in such a state before. It was a breach of their understanding, a crack in the world they thought they knew. After what felt like an eternity, the queen's body jerked, and a sharp gasp of air escaped her lips. She coughed violently, her eyes fluttering open. Jacob didn't stop. He continued his efforts, pushing with everything he had, his own breath ragged from the exertion. The queen's body shuddered beneath his hands, her chest rising more steadily with each passing second. "Please, your majesty, hang in there," Jacob muttered, even as doubt gnawed at his mind. Was this even enough? Could he really save her? Finally, after what felt like an age, the queen's breathing began to steady. Her eyes opened fully, and she looked up at Jacob, her gaze filled with confusion, fear, and something else. Something he couldn't place. She was alive. For now, at least. But Jacob knew this wasn't over. The queen's lips parted, but no words came out. She tried to speak, but her voice was nothing more than a whisper. "Take her to the medical bay," someone shouted from behind Jacob. He looked up to see a group of royal physicians hurrying toward them, their alien forms moving swiftly through the crowd. Jacob nodded, giving one final glance at the queen before allowing the physicians to take over. The royal guards stepped forward to clear the way, their eyes full of awe and uncertainty. No one had ever seen their queen in such a vulnerable state. For a moment, Jacob felt a strange mix of pride and fear. He had saved the queen, but at what cost? The queen was rushed to the medical chamber, and Jacob followed, unwilling to leave her side. There was a mystery here, one that went far beyond a simple fainting spell. The queen had been invincible, but now she was fragile. And Jacob knew that something was wrong. There was a hidden reason for her collapse, and he was determined to find out what it was. As they moved through the palace halls, Jacob's thoughts raced. What could cause the Queen of Zorath to fall so suddenly? Had someone poisoned her? Was it an assassination attempt? Or was there something else, a deeper, darker force at play? In the Queen's private medical room, the royal physicians surrounded her, but they seemed as confused as Jacob had been. The Queen's vital signs were improving, but they could not explain what had happened. Her body seemed to be recovering on its own, but there was still an underlying problem that they could not detect. Jacob watched from the corner of the room, his mind racing. He knew there was more to this story than anyone realized. The Queen wasn't just ill. She was hiding something, and he would find out what it was, even if it meant going against the orders of the Zorathian royal family. The sterile walls of the medical chamber hummed softly as Jacob stood quietly in the corner, watching the royal physicians work on the Queen. Her breathing had steadied, but her pallor remained unnaturally pale, and her eyes seemed distant, as though she were lost in thought. Despite the medical team's best efforts, no one could explain what had caused her sudden collapse. Jacob's mind refused to stop racing. He knew he hadn't imagined what had happened earlier. The Queen had been fine one moment, strong, commanding, and then, without warning, she had fallen to the ground, as if her very life force had been drained from her. Something deeper, more dangerous, was at play here. As the physicians continued their examination, Jacob leaned against the cold metallic wall of the chamber. The Queen's lifeless form on the medical table seemed to pull at his conscience. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed something crucial. He had grown up with a strong sense of justice. It was why he had joined the military. Why he had agreed to serve as a guard on this alien world. But what was happening now felt wrong. The Zorathian Queen, a being that everyone believed invincible, had collapsed before his eyes. No one was willing to question why, and that made Jacob uncomfortable. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't an alien who had accepted the Queen's invincibility as fact. He needed answers. As the hours passed, the Queen remained unconscious. Her body still, but the steady rise and fall of her chest gave Jacob a small measure of relief. He couldn't leave, not until he knew what had happened, but there was little he could do for her in this sterile medical room. That's when he saw something strange. The Queen's medical monitor, which had been showing stable vitals just moments before, flickered. The numbers on the screen began to change rapidly, too rapidly. Jacob's eyes narrowed. The heart rate that had been steady suddenly spiked, then dropped again, and the blood pressure numbers fluctuated in a way that shouldn't have been possible. It was as if something inside her body was fighting against the life support systems. He stepped closer, leaning over the Queen's bed, examining the readings carefully. There was a pattern, something he had seen only once before. A strange set of energy signatures. They appeared on the medical screen as a series of fluctuating waves. Jacob had seen something similar when he was a child during a science class back on Earth. The teacher had explained that certain frequencies of energy could affect the body in unnatural ways, disrupting its normal functions. What was this? Was the Queen somehow linked to an energy force that no one else could see? Jacob's heart raced again. This was no ordinary medical issue. There was something else at play. Before he could continue his thoughts, a voice interrupted him. "Sergeant, Jacob," said a soft voice. He turned around to see one of the royal physicians standing in the doorway. "I need to speak with you." The physician, a Zorathian woman with translucent blue skin and large dark eyes, stepped inside. Her expression was serious. "We have isolated the Queen's condition, but we are still unsure of the cause. It is unlike anything we've ever seen before." Jacob nodded, his mind still focused on the readings from the monitor. "I think I know what's going on." The physician raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Jacob's eyes narrowed as he glanced back at the Queen's still form. "There's a force inside her, something unnatural. It's affecting her body, her health. Her vitals aren't just out of balance, they're being tampered with." The physician looked at Jacob, then at the monitor. She seemed to hesitate for a moment. "You think someone is attacking the Queen?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure. It could be anything. Poison, an energy force, something. But it's not natural. We need to find out what it is before it's too late." The physician nodded slowly, then glanced at the Queen's unconscious body. "I'll inform the Royal Council. They must know." As the physician left, Jacob's thoughts raced again. He knew the Queen wasn't just ill. There was something much darker at play. But what and why? He had to find out. Later that evening, Jacob found himself outside the royal chambers, standing in the shadow of the grand palace. The cold night air nipped at his skin, but he hardly noticed it. His mind was consumed by the Queen's mysterious condition. The Zorathian people believed in their Queen's strength, and for good reason. She had ruled for so long that no one dared question her authority. But now, something had happened, something that no one could explain. The idea of her weakness unsettled the entire empire. The Royal Council had been convened, and Jacob had been invited to attend as a special guest. As he walked through the long, elegant halls of the palace, he could hear the low murmur of the council members discussing the Queen's condition. The grand chamber where the council met was a vast open space, lit by soft, glowing lights and filled with Zorathian figures dressed in ornate robes. The air was thick with tension. Jacob stood at the back of the room, observing the council from a distance. The Zorathians were a proud race, known for their advanced technology and their warrior culture. To them, the Queen was not just a ruler, she was a symbol, the very heart of their civilization. And yet, here they were, unable to explain why she had collapsed, why her body seemed to be failing. "We must act quickly," said the head of the council, a tall Zorathian male with dark violet skin. His voice was sharp, commanding. The Queen's condition is worsening. We need a solution. One of the other council members spoke up. But what could cause such a collapse? The Queen has always been in perfect health. That is precisely the problem, Jacob spoke up, his voice steady. I believe there's something inside her. Something she's been carrying for a long time. It's affecting her, and I don't think it's a natural illness. It's more than that. The council members turned to look at Jacob. Explain, the head of the council demanded. I've been observing the Queen's medical readings. There's an energy pattern in her system, something that shouldn't be there. It's interfering with her body, and I believe it's causing the collapse. But it's not poison or a disease. It's something more unnatural, Jacob explained. The room fell silent. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. You mean an external force? One of them asked. Jacob nodded. It's possible. Maybe even a hidden power she's been unknowingly connected to. But we need to find out where it's coming from and how to stop it. The council members exchanged more looks, their unease growing. Finally, the head of the council spoke again. We will investigate this further, Sergeant Jacob, but you must understand, we do not take kindly to outsiders making accusations about our Queen's health. If you are wrong, Jacob met his gaze without flinching. I'm not wrong, and I won't stop until I find out what's happening to her. Jacob sat at the edge of the Queen's bed, his mind racing. The royal physicians were still baffled by her condition. Her vitals were erratic, and yet there was no sign of any disease or poison. She should have recovered by now, but instead, her body seemed to be rejecting all attempts to stabilize her. He had already tried to analyze the medical readings in the hopes of finding some clue, but no one seemed to know what was happening. The Queen's pale face lay lifeless on the pillow, and her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Jacob couldn't stop thinking about the strange energy signatures he had seen on the medical monitor. He couldn't explain it, but he had the strong sense that there was something inside the Queen, a force, that was draining her life force. But what was it? Where had it come from? Jacob couldn't help but feel that the answer was somewhere within the Queen's own history. The Zorathians, after all, were a highly advanced species. They had knowledge and technology that humans could only dream of. But what if the Queen had been hiding something all along? What if the very power that had made her so strong was the thing that was slowly killing her? As he sat there, lost in thought, the door to the medical room opened with a soft hiss. Jacob looked up to see the royal physician from earlier, the one who had spoken to him, enter the room. She walked in with purpose, her face serious. Her translucent blue skin glowed faintly in the dim light of the chamber. She paused for a moment, looking at Jacob as though deciding how to begin. You're still here? She asked softly. Jacob stood up, his eyes never leaving the Queen. I don't think I can leave yet. Not until I understand what's happening to her. The physician nodded, taking a step closer to the Queen's bed. She glanced at the Queen's medical readings before speaking again. We've been monitoring her, but the results are confusing. It's as if something is interfering with her body, but we don't know what. Jacob's brow furrowed. I think I might have an idea, but I need your help. The physician raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? Jacob paused, looking around the room to make sure they were alone. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. There's something inside her, something unnatural. I saw energy readings that shouldn't exist. It's like a foreign force is taking control of her body. But it's not poison. It's not a virus. It's something else entirely. The physician took a step back, her expression unreadable. What are you suggesting? I think the Queen has been carrying this energy for a long time, Jacob said, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and fear. What if she's been using some sort of power all this time, something she doesn't fully understand? I'm not talking about a weapon or technology. I think this is something older, something deeply connected to her people's past. The physician didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be considering his words carefully. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. It's possible. The Zorathian people have a long and complicated history, filled with both knowledge and mystery. We don't talk about it much, but there are ancient texts, legends that speak of a power hidden deep within our bloodline, a power that could be both a gift and a curse. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. A hidden power? The physician nodded slowly. Yes. It is said that the first queen of our people, our ancestors, discovered this power long ago. It was a source of immense strength, but it came at a price. The legend says that this power was passed down through the generations, but it was never meant to be used continuously. It was meant to be a last resort, a secret weapon to protect our people when all else failed. Jacob leaned forward, his interest piqued. So, the queen, she's been using this power? The physician hesitated, then nodded. It's possible. But the queen's ancestors warned that it was dangerous. It could drain the life force of the one who wielded it if used too often. That's why it was hidden away, locked in our bloodline. Only a select few knew of its existence. Jacob stared at the queen, his mind racing. Could it be true? Could the very power that had made her so strong be the thing that was now destroying her? And if so, how could they stop it? The question is, Jacob said, his voice filled with urgency. How do we stop it? How do we remove this energy from her before it's too late? The physician stepped closer to the queen's bed, her expression grim. There is a ritual, an ancient ceremony passed down through generations. But it is forbidden. Only a few in our history have known of it. If we perform the ritual, it might sever the queen's connection to the power. But it's dangerous. If it's not done correctly, it could kill her. Jacob's mind raced. He had to act. Time was running out, and he knew they couldn't wait any longer. I'll do whatever it takes, Jacob said, determination in his voice. We need to save her. The physician looked at him carefully. The ritual requires more than just medical knowledge. It requires a connection, a deep understanding of the queen's power. Jacob interrupted her. I know. I'm willing to take the risk. I'll do it. The physician seemed to think for a moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But you must understand, Sergeant Jacob, that if you fail, there may be no coming back from this. The queen's life will be in your hands. Jacob nodded firmly. I understand. The physician led Jacob to a small chamber hidden deep within the palace. The room was dimly lit, and the air was thick with the scent of ancient incense. It was a sacred place, a place where only the most trusted had ever been allowed to enter. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the floor was inscribed with complex patterns. This is where the ritual must be performed, the physician said quietly, her voice filled with reverence. We will need to bring the queen here. Only in this room, in this space, can the ritual be completed. Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. The room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if it was alive. It was both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift and change as he gazed at them, as though they were alive, responding to the presence of the queen's power. Where do we start? Jacob asked, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at him. The physician took a deep breath. We begin by connecting to the queen. You must be the one to bridge the gap between her and the power that lies within her. Only you can do this, Sergeant Jacob. Jacob nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a sense of responsibility, a weight that had never been so heavy. He had to save the queen. There was no other choice. Back in the medical chamber, the queen's body had been carefully prepared for the ritual. She lay still, her pale face bathed in soft golden light. Jacob stood at her side, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out to touch her. The physician watched from a distance, her face grave. "Remember, this is a delicate process. You must focus. If you lose control, the power will consume you." Jacob nodded again, trying to steady his breath. He reached down and placed his hands on the queen's chest, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of her breath. The energy in the room seemed to shift as soon as he touched her. It was as if something inside the queen responded to his presence. The physician began chanting in an ancient language, her voice low and rhythmic. The symbols on the walls of the chamber began to glow faintly, and Jacob could feel the air grow heavier. It was as if the very fabric of reality was bending around them. Jacob's heart raced as he felt the queen's power course through his hands, through his entire body. It was overwhelming, intense. The force inside her was ancient, primal, and it wanted to take control. But Jacob fought back, focusing all of his will on separating the power from the queen's body. He could feel it fighting him, resisting his efforts. But he didn't give up. Slowly, the queen's body began to tremble. Her chest rose and fell more rapidly, and her breathing became shallow. But Jacob didn't stop. He pushed harder, drawing the energy out, separating it from the queen. Finally, with a surge of strength, he felt the power loosen its grip. The queen's body went limp, and Jacob's hands shook as he slowly withdrew them from her chest. It was done. The queen was free. The room was thick with silence after the ritual. Jacob stood there, his heart pounding as he looked down at the queen, still unconscious on the stone altar. Sweat clung to his brow, his arms sore from the strain of the ritual. The power he had, just unleashed, had been immense, and for a brief moment he had feared he wouldn't be able to contain it. But the queen was still breathing, her chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. The ancient energy that had once coursed through her body seemed to be gone now. Jacob could feel it, an absence, a void where the power had been. For, better or worse, the queen was no longer connected to the energy that had kept her strong for so long. And now, the only thing left was to see whether she would survive. He glanced over at the physician, who stood silently in the corner of the chamber, her eyes filled with a mix of awe and worry. She had watched the entire ritual, her face reflecting the deep importance of the moment. Jacob wasn't sure what to think yet, but he had to believe they had done the right thing. The queen's life was more important than anything else. Slowly, the physician approached the altar, her footsteps light and hesitant. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched the queen's forehead. "It is done," she said softly, almost to herself. Her voice echoed in the quiet room, carrying a weight that Jacob could feel in his chest. He nodded, but didn't speak, his mind racing with questions. What would happen now? Had they truly freed the queen from the power that had once sustained her? And would she recover, or would the absence of that power leave her broken? The physician's voice broke the silence again. "We have done what we could. But there is still much to understand." Jacob turned to face her. "What do you mean?" "Sergeant Jacob, the power we removed from the queen, this was not just an energy source. It was tied to her very being, to her identity. Without it, she will change. We don't know how she will be, or if she will even survive without it." Jacob's stomach twisted at the thought. "So we could have killed her?" The physician shook her head, her expression serious. "No, not necessarily, but we have altered her fate. The queen was chosen to wield this power for a reason. even if it was a dangerous one. There was always a balance between the power she held and the life she led. Now, we've upset that balance. Jacob felt the weight of her words. He had saved the queen. But at what cost? He had no way of knowing what the future held for her now. But he couldn't afford to dwell on that. He had to focus on what came next. As they waited, the queen's body seemed to stir slightly. Her fingers twitched, and a soft sigh escaped her lips. Jacob held his breath, watching her closely. Was she waking up? Was this the moment they had been waiting for? Then, the queen's eyes fluttered open. Her gaze was slow, unfocused at first, and then she blinked several times as if trying to clear her vision. She slowly looked around the room, her expression one of confusion and fear. When her eyes landed on Jacob, they seemed to soften, though the hint of worry still lingered in them. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. Jacob stepped forward cautiously, his voice gentle. "You're safe. We did it. You're free." The queen's brow furrowed as if she didn't fully understand what he meant. "Free? From what?" Jacob paused, searching for the right words. "From the power that was inside you. The energy that was draining you." Her eyes widened slightly, and she glanced down at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. I don't remember." The physician stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with respect. "You were connected to something ancient. It was a power that gave you strength, but it also took from you. We've removed it." The queen's gaze shifted to the physician, and her lips parted as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. She seemed lost in thought for a moment, her eyes distant. Jacob couldn't tell what was going through her mind, but he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. "I was a vessel for this power," the queen said, her voice tinged with a quiet sadness. "I thought I could control it. I thought I was strong enough. But I wasn't. I hurt myself, didn't I?" The physician's expression softened. "You did what you had to do to protect your people, but you couldn't have known the price it would exact." The queen closed her eyes for a moment, as if in deep contemplation. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What happens now?" Jacob stepped forward, his voice firm. "Now you have a choice. You don't need the power to be the queen. You can lead with your mind, your heart, not just your strength." She looked up at him then, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she simply stared at him, as though weighing his words carefully. Finally, she spoke. "I never wanted to be a figurehead," she said quietly. "I never wanted to rule just because I was powerful. But I thought it was the only way. I thought it was my duty." Jacob nodded, understanding what she meant. "You can still lead, just not the way you thought you had to." The queen looked at the physician, then back at Jacob. For the first time since she had awoken, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Maybe I don't have to be like the rulers before me. Maybe I can build something different." The physician smiled gently. "Yes, Your Majesty. You can." Jacob felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't just that the queen had survived. It was that she had the chance to build something new. Something that didn't rely on the ancient power that had nearly destroyed her. He had given her the chance to lead in her own way. And for the first time, Jacob felt like he had truly done something meaningful. As the queen slowly rose from the altar, the room seemed to shift. The air, once heavy with tension, felt lighter now. The queen was still weak, but there was a new strength in her eyes. It wasn't the strength of the ancient power, but the strength of someone who had faced her own weakness and overcome it. She looked at Jacob, her expression softer now. "Thank you, Sergeant Jacob," she said quietly. "You saved my life. You saved my people." Jacob nodded, his chest tightening at her words. I didn't do it alone. The physician stepped forward and bowed her head. You have done what many thought impossible. The Queen's future is now in her own hands. The Queen smiled faintly, though there was still a sadness in her eyes. Yes, it is. And I have much to learn. But I will do it. I will lead. Not with power, but with wisdom. Jacob looked at her, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. She was no longer the invincible queen, but she didn't need to be. She was something more, human, perhaps in a way. And that made her stronger than she had ever been. As they left the chamber, the queen stood tall, her head held high. The palace, once filled with the oppressive weight of her power, now felt like a place of possibility. The queen had been freed, and in doing so, she had freed her people as well. And Jacob? He had done what he set out to do. He had saved the queen, and in doing so, he had changed the future of an entire empire. The quiet hum of the palace filled the air as the queen slowly walked through the grand halls of her home, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished stone floors. The once grand and overpowering palace that had symbolized the queen's immense power now felt different to her. It no longer seemed like a fortress of strength, but a place of uncertainty. The absence of the power that had sustained her for so long left her feeling strangely empty, yet strangely free at the same time. Jacob stood by her side, watching the way she moved, her back straight, her eyes focused. It was clear that the queen was adjusting to a new reality. Her steps were slow but steady, as though she was learning to walk again, not just physically but emotionally and mentally. The queen's mind had always been sharp, her leadership clear, but the power that had coursed through her had clouded her true self. Now, that same power was gone, and she had to rediscover who she was. Do you feel it? The queen asked softly, breaking the silence. Her voice, though still weak, was steady. Jacob, who had been walking a few steps behind her, nodded. Yes, it's different, but it's peaceful in a way. The queen glanced at him, her lips curling into a faint smile. It is, but it's also uncertain. I don't know who I am without it. I don't know how to lead without it. Jacob understood the queen's fear. She had always relied on the strength that the mysterious energy had given her. For decades, it had defined her reign, made her a symbol of power and authority. But now, she was starting from scratch, facing the unknown without that crutch. You'll figure it out, Jacob said gently, his voice filled with confidence. You don't need that power to lead. You've got the strength inside you, the same strength that made you the queen. The queen stopped walking for a moment, looking out of a large window that overlooked the palace gardens. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the horizon. The colors were rich and warm, unlike the cold, sterile light of the palace. It was a beautiful sight, one she had never truly noticed before, not in the way she saw it now. She turned to Jacob, her expression thoughtful. But how do I lead now? I have no army to command, no power to force people into submission. How do I convince them that I am still worthy of being their queen? Jacob took a step closer to her, his voice firm. You lead with trust. You lead by example. You don't need to control them with fear. You need to earn their respect. And that, Your Majesty, is the hardest part. The queen looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Then, slowly, she nodded. Thank you, Sergeant Jacob, she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. I think I understand now. Jacob smiled, relieved that she seemed to be finding her way. But there was still one question that lingered in the back of his mind. What would happen to the Zorathian Empire now that its queen had changed? Would her people accept her newfound path, or would they rebel against the loss of her strength? That was something they would have to face together. Later that night, the queen held a council meeting, inviting her most trusted advisors to discuss the future of her empire. The royal hall, which had once been filled with the cold authority of her power, now felt open and welcoming. The air was lighter, as if everyone present understood that change was on the horizon. Jacob stood near the back of the room, watching as the queen addressed her council. She no longer wore the heavy, ornate robes of old. Instead, she dressed simply, her attire a symbol of her shift in perspective. The queen was no longer a ruler who demanded obedience. She was a leader who sought cooperation. "My people," the queen began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I know I have not been the queen you expected. For years I ruled through power and fear, but that will not be the case anymore. I want to lead you through trust, compassion, and understanding. I want to build a future where we work together, where no one has to suffer for the sake of the throne." The council members exchanged uncertain glances. They had never seen their queen like this before. Some looked uneasy, while others looked hopeful. Change was always difficult, and for an empire that had been ruled with an iron fist for so long, this new path was a challenge. One of the council members, a tall Zorathian woman with bright green skin, spoke up. "Your Majesty, what you propose is noble, but it is not without its risks. Our people are used to your strength, to your power. If we abandon that, will we be able to protect ourselves from our enemies?" The queen nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your concerns, counselor, but the true strength of our people does not lie in fear or in power. It lies in unity. We have relied on our military for so long, but we have neglected our people, their voices, their needs. If we continue down this path, we risk losing everything. I want to change that. I want to build a future where every Zorathian can have a voice." Another council member, a middle-aged Zorathian with dark purple skin, added, "But how can we protect ourselves if we lose our might? There are factions within the galaxy that would see us fall. We cannot simply rely on words." Jacob stepped forward at that point, his voice steady and strong. "We can protect ourselves by making alliances, by earning the trust of others. Strength is not just about weapons. It's about how you treat those around you. If we build a future of peace and cooperation, we will be stronger than any enemy that threatens us." The council members fell silent, their gazes turning to the queen for her response. She looked at them, her expression calm, yet filled with conviction. "I know this won't be easy," the queen said quietly, "but I believe this is the only way forward. I will lead us with a new vision, one that embraces compassion, trust, and unity. And I ask for your help." For a long moment, no one spoke. The room was filled with tension, but also a sense of hope. The queen's words had struck a chord with some, and others were beginning to see the wisdom in her approach. Slowly, the council members nodded in agreement. "We will support you, Your Majesty," said the green-skinned counselor, her voice filled with respect. "Together, we will build a new future for our people." The queen smiled, the weight of the world lifting from her shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, she felt like she had the support of her people. The road ahead would be difficult, but with their trust and cooperation, she knew they could overcome any challenge. The next few days were filled with meetings, discussions, and debates as the queen and her council worked to implement the changes she had promised. The queen spent hours listening to her people, hearing their concerns, and beginning to shape a new direction for the empire. It was exhausting work, but it was also rewarding. She felt a sense of purpose that she had never known before. As for Jacob, he stood by her side, offering his support and advice whenever needed. He had been her guard, But now he was something more, a trusted advisor, a friend. He had seen the queen at her lowest, but now he was witnessing her rise to something greater. It was a slow process, but Jacob believed in her, and he believed in the future she was building. One evening, as they stood together on the balcony of the palace looking out over the vast city below, the queen turned to Jacob with a smile. "You were right," she said softly. "I don't need the power I once had. I have something much stronger." Jacob smiled back, his voice filled with pride. "You've always had that strength, Your Majesty. Now you're just learning how to use it." The queen looked out at the horizon, the setting sun casting its warm glow over the world she now had the power to change. It wasn't the power of ancient energy, but the power of her people. And that was all she needed.